And we are live. Welcome to the NBA Strategy Show. It is Friday, December 10th. I am Josh Engelman. I am joined by Adam Scher. We are brought to you by PrizePicks. We got a good one on our hands. 9-game NBA slate coming off of the short slate from yesterday. Should be a fun one. Plenty to talk about. Before we do any of that, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Please hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. You don't want to miss our content. We have a ton of it. Now let's start here. Adam, how's it going?
Going pretty well. Glad it's Friday, but also glad to have like a nice 9-game slate. I was getting tired of the 13 and then 3. So excited for that.
I'm enjoying this slate for sure. I took a lap through it for the process show earlier today. Pretty cut and dry. There's not too much that we're waiting on. So we're either going to get really ridiculous news that completely upends this slate, sort of like Dylan Brooks getting ruled out with 20 minutes to go before lock last night, which didn't see that one coming, that's for sure. Worked out in the end, but I think we got a good one going on today, so I'm pretty excited for it. We only have the hour, so I'm ready to dive in if you are.
Yeah, let's go.
All righty, here we go. Sacramento Kings, 1-point favorites in Charlotte, 228 total. Big piece of news on this one. other than the fact that the Hornets are still missing half of their team due to COVID, is that we don't have Richaun Holmes for Sacramento. He is the lone guy on the injury report for the Kings in terms of anybody that matters. We saw Tristan Thompson come onto the floor for Richaun Holmes last time out when he got hurt. We also saw Tristan Thompson then come out and start the third quarter in that game. Let's just start there. Are you assuming it's Tristan Thompson for right now?
Yeah, I'm assuming it's him for now. We didn't see anything weird last time out. Thompson came in for Holmes, then he started the half. Alex Len was his backup. So that's my assumption. I also don't think one, we'll have the news, and two, I don't think it matters that much in the sense that if you build your lineups with Tristan Thompson as the starter, and then they say Alex Len is starting, just make Tristan Thompson Alex Len.
Yep. And I think you probably, if you're willing to go to one, you should sort of be willing to go to both.
Yeah, they're both, as long as your assumption is that they're going to play 2 or even 3 centers, assuming that the third center, that it's not an even split, but maybe Damian Jones plays 6 minutes.
Bagley.
Yeah, or Bagley, or whoever. If you assume that you're getting at least, let's say 22 to 24 minutes from either of Tristan Thompson or Alex Len, you should be willing to play both.
Yep. And Tristan Thompson, flat 34. Yeah, flat. It's 3,500 on DraftKings, center eligible. Len is 3,100. So it's easy to do that. Tristan Thompson and Alex Len on FanDuel both have power forward eligibility, which, let's be clear here, is a complete farce. Tristan Thompson's 4,800, which makes him significantly less interesting than he could have been. Alex Len is 3,900. Let's just look at the rest of Sacramento. Then we saw Harrison Barnes finally return after being out for a bit. Metu fully left the rotation. We've got a little bit of ownership on FanDuel coming into Fox and Barnes. We've got a lot of bit of ownership coming into Barnes. And one of the chalkiest plays of the day, Terence Davis, 4K on DraftKings, shooting guard, small forward eligible, and has basically become Buddy Hield over the past 3 days. I don't mean from a skill set standpoint, but from a playing time standpoint. What do we do with Terence Davis?
He's been playing a lot. He's been playing relatively well. 4K flat for him still looks pretty good here because at this point, I don't really think there's much reason to think that he's going away. So 4K for him against Charlotte looks good. There's still some risk in the sense that what happens if Buddy Hield comes out and shoots really well, which he certainly could against Charlotte. If in that case, maybe you see Buddy Hield just stay on the floor and Davis plays less minutes. So I think that's the downside risk to Davis. But assuming he's playing relatively well, I still think that, getting minutes, at least in the mid-20s, is pretty doable for him. Harrison Barnes at 5,400 on DraftKings is really interesting as well. Another case of coaches just flat out lying. They said last game that Harrison Barnes would not be on a minutes limit. He then played 29.7 minutes, which I know you and I had talked about, or maybe me and Alex, whoever I had done shows with that day, had talked about, we thought 30 minutes was a pretty good guess at what Harrison Barnes would play. It's what he played. Alvin Gentry coming into the game apparently did not know that's what he was going to play. But either way, if you give him 30 minutes at 5,400, he looks fine. Assuming he plays more than that tonight, he looks even better. So it's still just a bad price tag on Harrison Barnes.
Yeah, absolutely. He definitely looks like the second best option. Do you have any interest in an unowned Buddy Hield?
A little bit. I'd have more if the slate were smaller and there were going to be less options. But the reason I do have a little bit is what I was just saying when we talked about Terence Davis. If Buddy Hield does have a good shooting game at 5,300, not only is he producing at an above average rate, but it's pretty easy for him to just stay on the floor and be in, the closing lineup in at least one half. And if he does that, then he's likely to get to mid-20s in minutes. So I don't think I'm going crazy with Buddy Hield, but I do think that there is some volatility in his minutes, which is always nice because it leads to low ownership and still a high ceiling.
Yeah, that he strikes me as one of those guys that we talk about now that he's very self-fulfilling. If he does get back to his normal 28 to 29 minutes, it's probably because it's going really well for Buddy Hield, and that's why you would want to get to him. Otherwise, he's just playing his normal 20, what is now his normal 20 minutes, and he sucks, and it doesn't matter. That lineup sucks too. Right.
The way I view it is, for anybody that's rostered Buddy Hield, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If it's the game where at halftime, Buddy Hield has 4 fantasy points, he's just playing 20 minutes that night. If it's the game where he has 20 at the half, he's probably still playing 26 or 27. So it's kind of just you were going to throw away that Buddy Hield lineup regardless. The bad one. So that's kind of still how I view him.
Jeremy Savage in chat Nice to see you making it here after your Jaren Jackson take yesterday. Do you have any other Sacramento Kings thoughts, Adam?
No.
All righty. Well, we're certainly going to have some thoughts here, but they're all pretty easy.
Wait, did you just ask me if I have any Sacramento Kings thoughts?
Yeah. Any further Sacramento Kings thoughts?
Okay, so I thought you said Jeremy Savage is in chat, and then I thought his question was, do I have any Sacramento Kings thoughts? Like we weren't just talking about them.
No, I don't. If he had a question, I wouldn't ask you.
But no, I don't really have much more. Davion Mitchell at 3,400 is fine. Like he's someone else that if he's playing well, he can be in the closing lineup, but I don't really see much else that stands out.
All righty. Then let's move over to Charlotte, where they're still, you got the nerve to say that you had Jaren Jackson. Don't ever come back. We know what we're doing here for Charlotte. They got 5 guys that play like 40 minutes a game right now with everybody out. There's honestly less ownership coming into some of these guys than I was totally expecting. Bridges is around 20 across both sites. Hayward's around 20 across both sites. Oubre's 20 on FanDuel, 10 on DraftKings. Price is up quite a bit. PJ Washington is 15 to 20, depending on the site. And then we get to Cody Martin, who is stupidly 5K on FanDuel and projected for right now 63% ownership, which I don't even think is all that crazy. I mean, it's getting to the point where I want to have a little bit less, but I understand why he's getting it. He's playing 40 minutes a game and is only 5K. We're just sort of, I don't want to say jamming these main 5 guys for Charlotte, but these are very large priorities for today.
Yeah, like the prices are adjusting, but they're adjusting in the sense that they're getting close to accurate, not in the sense that they were close and went up. So that's always a distinction that I think you need to make when you see prices on players increase is, where are they increasing from? And they were drastically underpriced. Then they were a little bit less underpriced. Now maybe they're, even a little less underpriced, but there's still value to be had here. You mentioned Cody Martin. He's 5,700. He played 43 minutes last game. He's not the best fantasy producer, but if you're going to get that kind of playing time from somebody in, at a 5 to 6K price tag, he's just going to look pretty good. There's obviously a lot of usage and ball handling to go around here. Without Ball or Rozier on the floor this season, Martin in 247 minutes, he only has a 15.5% usage rate, but he's averaged 0.86 DraftKings points per minute. Gordon Hayward's at 1.01, Oubre's at 1.07, Bridges is at a point per minute flat. Washington's at 1.01. You just basically have all these guys that get around the fantasy point per minute. And in the case of Hayward and Bridges and Oubre are likely to play 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's craziness. It's true craziness right now for this team. I don't expect to get to Book Night, Richards, or Thor. Do you?
No, we only got 11 and a half minutes from Book Night last game. Like you potentially could see Nick Richards play a little bit less. And then as a result, Book Night get a little bit more. But I think the more likely thing is that if Richards plays less, it's like PJ Washington is going to pick up minutes before Book Night does. So I think it's sort of for Book Night to get more, you probably actually would need like Cody Martin or Oubre or Hayward to play less. So, could happen, but pretty unlikely.
All righty.
Are you interested in Washington?
In PJ Washington?
Yeah.
I don't know if you meant like the state or even the District of Columbia. I mean, 6,600 on DraftKings still looks pretty good to me. I'd be a little bit north of that number that I'm looking at right now. 6,600 on FanDuel as well. If I went by the crunch that I ran, I have him as very slightly over-owned, but still to me, a guy that I'm going to have in like 15-ish% just by default. I don't think that you could really get fully away from any of these Charlotte guys.
I actually meant the former president, and I'm disgusted by how unpatriotic you are.
That's fair. I'm trying to think of, I was going to go with Kermit Washington. Really big fan of knocking out Rudy T.
But yeah, I'm with you on Washington. Like if he plays 24 minutes, he's not likely to be very useful. But if he does get to 30 minutes, he's going to look pretty good at 6,600. So I think ownership is going to matter a lot to me there. Right now he's at 13% on DraftKings, which I think is reasonable.
All righty. Anything else here for Charlotte?
Nope.
All right. On to the Dallas Mavericks hosting the Indiana Pacers. One side of this game is interesting. It's certainly not the Dallas side. We have no Willie Cauley-Stein for this one still. We actually saw Moses Brown get 12 minutes this last time out. Josh Green got 10. That was not like garbage time, or they were just like actually a part of the rotation, which is whatever. Luka Doncic, 17% owned on FanDuel, is the only guy north of 10% on either site. He's even the highest on DraftKings at 7. To me, I'm willing to play Luka, and that's basically it. It's a weird one for Dallas, but they don't look good.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. I mean, you can add Porzingis in at 8K as being fine, but pretty much healthy. 105 implied total, not a great spot. So I'm with you. I don't really see a ton that stands out.
Perfect. Of all the spots, like, it's just not that day to talk about anything else from Dallas. But we do have a lot to talk about for the Indiana Pacers, as per usual. Malcolm Brogdon still has a stupid $7,400 price tag on FanDuel. He is pulling quite a bit of ownership. Karis LeVert continues to be $5,800 on FanDuel, $5,800 on DraftKings. He's in double digits in ownership. Chris Duarte is, for some strange reason, $4,400 on DraftKings. He is pulling the most ownership of anyone in this game. Sabonis is still $8,800 on FanDuel. That's a great price. Miles Turner for $6,700 with power forward eligibility on FanDuel, or $6,100 on DraftKings. That'll work. We've seen O'Shea Brissett fall into about 20 plus minutes for the past couple of games. He's only $3,200. You get power forward center eligibility on DK. Pacers have some pieces.
Yeah, they do. 5,800 for LeVert looks solid. You know, we've kind of talked about his production not being great when he plays with Brogdon and Sabonis, but still likely to play low to mid 30s here at 5,800. Miles Turner pretty much always has a ceiling because of his block upside. 6,100 is reasonable for him. You mentioned Brissett last game against the Knicks. He played 20 minutes off the bench. He did get an extra minute 25 in garbage time there. So I think you were looking at around 18 minutes or so, like on average, but at 3,200, if he finds his way into a few extra minutes, he can look good. Duarte is still pretty cheap and has some extra minutes to play now with TJ McConnell out. Played 30 last game, but lost about 4 minutes to garbage time. So you were looking at about 34 minutes if that game had been competitive. So there are that. And then obviously, Sabonis and Brogdon are always viable options. So definitely plenty to get to here. The one thing I think that's noteworthy, it's something Alex had brought up prior to this game on Wednesday, is that we didn't know if we should expect Indiana's rotation to change with the announcement basically that they're willing to fire sale their team. We didn't really see it happen against the Knicks. If you just look at the minutes people played, you could come to the conclusion that it did, but because of 4 minutes of garbage time, if that game were competitive, you were looking still at 36 minutes from Turner, almost 37 from Brogdon, 34 from Duarte, 37 from Sabonis, like 32 from LeVert. So I'm still expecting Indiana to run similar rotations to what they've done all year.
Yeah, they don't, generally speaking, mix it up all that much. So that'll work for me. I've got nothing else here.
Me neither.
Schedule for the rest of the day. Lots of stuff going on here around Awesemo.com. 1, NFL On the Contrary, coming up at 11 a.m. But that is not it for NFL shows. At 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, we get the NFL Strategy Top Stacks show. 2 p.m., NHL Strategy show. Another show that's going on at 2 p.m. on our fantasy football channel will be the Awesemo Fantasy Football Show. That's more season-long oriented. Well, and by more, I mean pretty much exclusively. 3 p.m., you get the Yahoo specific NFL show. Adam will then be back at 5 p.m. for the NBA Deeper Dive. I don't know who will be back for the NBA Live Before Lock show at 6 p.m., but it won't be me. But that's 7 more live shows plus tons of pre-recorded content on the rest of the day. I assume Adam's injury report video will be out later today. My contenders videos will be out later today. So you get a ton at awesemo.com. Plus you get free content. NBA player rankings are free. NFL top stacks are free. NHL player projections are free. And our MMA rankings for big one this Saturday, UFC pay-per-view, Poirier, Charles Oliveira. We got a big one up top. You don't want to miss that one. MMA rankings are free. I'm pumped for that one. I haven't played a UFC slate in a while, so that'll be a good one.
I haven't won a UFC slate in a while. That went from like, it's funny how, like, we talk about a lot, like how you go in streaks in DFS, but like there was a stretch where I just like did not lose at MMA. And then now it's just like, there's always that one pivotal fight. And I think I won it like every Saturday for 3 months straight. And then like, I don't think I've won it in the last 3 months.
Yeah. And that's a sport where, given the way that we're making lineups in MMA in particular, you could go a while.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Nets, 1-point dogs in Atlanta, 223 total. Assuming that There's no problems here with Durant and Aldridge. We're just back to normal with Brooklyn. They got a little bit of a break for some rest. No ownership coming into Brooklyn. 6% ownership to James Harden on FanDuel at 10-4. I'm going to let you guys know right now, you should have more James Harden than 6% if that's where we're going to be at on FanDuel. Highest owned guy on DraftKings from the Nets, 2.9% owned James Harden at 11,200. Do you like anything here for Brooklyn?
In tournaments, as long as they're low owned, I'm kind of interested just because of, the talent level. But, and I agree with you, Harden's FanDuel price tag is pretty cheap. He's 11-2 on DraftKings, which is more difficult to get to. He has played better lately after his slow start to the season. But, on a slate of this size, I still think paying 11-2 for him is more of a luxury than anything. Same goes for Durant at 10-8. I'm still interested in Aldridge at 5,500. His production's been down as a starter. We've talked about that a lot. But 5,500, if he's going to play 30 to 32 minutes, even at his reduced rates, seems like a pretty decent value.
I don't understand this lack of ownership on Harden, but I will happily get to a lot more if he's really 6% owned. And I'm with you on Aldridge. Still happy to get there, particularly on FanDuel, where he still has that power forward designation too.
Yeah. He's now at 6 games started with both of Harden and Durant active. 0.88 DraftKings points per minute, 29.8 minutes per game. It's one of those situations where you're like, 0.88 fantasy points per minute is disappointing given what Aldridge's rate, production is for the season, but it's still solid for a guy averaging 30 minutes per game at 5,500. And there's also still a chance that it comes up a bit, and kind of levels out around a fantasy point per minute.
Yep. We're on the same page there. I got nothing else for Brooklyn, just not a team that's looking all that great for today. Atlanta, pretty similar boat. There's just sort of like more guys you can get to. Kevin Huerter's 10% owned on FanDuel. Trae Young is 10% owned on DraftKings. There's some John Collins shares going around. The price on Capella and Collins is starting to pinch itself a little bit. Cam Reddish is probable. He is 3,200 with shooting guard, small forward eligibility. I think that's one of the better wild card value options you can find today. TLC is actually pulling the ownership in our ownership projections. I think that'll go away soon enough, depending on what you think about Cam Reddish being in. But how do you feel about Atlanta here? Lots of just mediocre to okay pieces.
Yeah, 0.1% ownership coming to Reddish and 10 going to TLC. I assume that just flips, assuming that Reddish plays. Reddish looks okay. I mean, obviously there's a lot of question marks about how many minutes he'll play. But if you do happen to get 24 minutes or so from Reddish at 3,200, he's going to look like a pretty solid value. Capella, Collins, Young, you can always get to them in tournaments. I don't think any one of them stands out in particular. I guess Collins at 7,200 would probably be the first one I get to, since he does have power forward eligibility. Trae Young's been playing better lately. He's been more aggressive. His assist percentage is up recently as well, but 10K is still probably more or less where he should be. Brooklyn has not been a bad defensive team this year, so that's worth keeping in mind as well. So mostly tournament options for me here. I think out of the main guys, Collins probably the one I get to first.
Yep, I think Collins is the best option here. And unowned Kevin Huerter is at least a little interesting, but 5,200 is a healthy price tag on DraftKings. I don't have anything else for Atlanta. New York Knicks at the Toronto Raptors. Knicks 1.5 point dogs, 209 total. We saw Nerlens Noel miss their last game. For this one, it appears that he is probable. I'm going with the assumption that Nerlens Noel is starting in this one, and we're getting some sort of pretty close to split between Noel and Mitchell Robinson. We've got RJ Barrett, who's been seeing a little bit of increased minutes as of late, about 15% owned across both sites. We're seeing Alec Burks get to 13% on FanDuel, where he's 6K. I've got a little bit of interest in low-owned Julius Randle on FanDuel, 8,700 power forward center, but not a lot of priorities going on here for the New York Knicks.
Yeah, same here. Barrett, 5,100 on DraftKings, the only guy from New York that's pulling ownership. And I think that makes sense. Like you said, the playing time's been up recently. Even last game, he played 35 minutes and lost 4 minutes potentially to garbage time. There's no guarantee that those minutes hold going forward, but if you're going to get, let's call it 34 or 35 minutes from Barrett to 5,100, he looks like a decent value there. Outside of that, not much stands out. You can always get to Julius Randle, but I think there's going to be better options today. Burks, Rose, those guys are fine, but it's mostly just, tournament darts as opposed to guys that I'm actually building around, with the exception possibly of Barrett.
I don't know what to do with Barrett right now. I hope those minutes continue. Maybe he's going to shoot his way out of whatever this is. On to the Toronto side. This one's kind of tricky. We got to wait on the news for Precious Achiuwa. Assuming he plays, he is the highest owned guy on DraftKings for Toronto at 10%. Nobody else is pulling any real ownership. FanDuel's a little bit different. Guys are cheaper. So Van Vliet's around 15, Siakam's around 15, Gary Trent got to 10. I like all these guys on FanDuel. They're all a little bit underpriced and they all play monstrous minutes. But Achiuwa is the big piece because that'll just free up a bunch of playing time. How are you feeling about Achiuwa here? And what do you want to do with the rest of Toronto?
So Achiuwa is, so he's questionable after missing last game. That's obviously a big piece because we got the Boucher start last game and we know he's a very good permanent producer when he gets minutes. He didn't play down the stretch, but if Achiuwa plays at 4,600, he looks like a pretty good value. We've been getting 30 to 32 minutes from him in his starts. He has struggled a bit playing alongside Siakam, so that's something to keep in mind, but he'd still look like a solid value. If Boucher were to start at 4K, he looks good with power forward eligibility. So definitely interested in either of those guys if they start.
All righty, that works for me. It's just, Knicks Raptors is a pretty tough game to want to try to get to a lot of unless people start getting ruled out. They're just not that kind of team. All these prices are sort of stabilized at this point. So I really don't have anything else that I want to add to Knicks Raptors.
No, me neither.
Unfortunately, we got to talk about this one. The Milwaukee Bucks taking on the Houston Rockets. 8.5-point favorites, Milwaukee in Houston, 224 total. Everybody's healthy for the Bucks right now. So we've got 20% ownership going to Giannis Antetokounmpo on both sites, 11K on FanDuel, 10.9 on DraftKings. Clearly, pretty easily the highest raw point projection for the slate today. I think there are some other pay up options that can get there if the ownership isn't going to be there. No real ownership coming to anything else on the DraftKings side. 6% Chris Middleton is it. On the FanDuel side, Portis is getting a bit of love. For some strange reason, maybe not strange reason, but like Grayson Allen's not getting anything on FanDuel at 4,100. That's at least a little bit interesting to me as a value option. Similar story for Drew, 5% owned on FanDuel at 7,800. He plays more minutes than basically anybody else on the team. I got him in for 34. I like a 5% owned Drew Holiday, especially against Houston. How are you seeing the Bucks today?
I was kind of talking to Shane in chat because I guess I'll just mention it because it's useful, something people do. He was talking about, defense first positions, shooting guard, small forward. The reason that's you can get in trouble with that is that it's just kind of like at this point an arbitrary tag, like shooting guard, small forward. Like it's just guys running up and down the floor, standing around the 3-point line and shooting. If you are gonna go that route, you're probably better off looking at play type data, like pick and roll usage versus how teams defend the pick and roll, frequency of scoring in transition versus how often teams give it up in transition. You can still kind of look at centers if you wanted to, since that is a real position still. But and I'm not saying any of that stuff's totally necessary either. Like I don't spend my day digging into any of it. But if you were going to go that route, I would go more towards play types than positions.
Yeah, but just to add on to that, one, you're at the mercy of whatever the scorekeepers called the positions for that particular time. If you're calling someone a shooting guard, but they're actually small forwards, but you're going based on the positions that are on like your site, whether that's FanDuel or DraftKings, that's murky too. That data is generally very, very, very blurry, and you don't want to just use it as gospel because teams don't just give up more to small forwards. That's just not a thing.
Right. There's typically going to be a reason. Like the small forwards that they give it up to also happen to have this thing in common where like they're all great in transition or something. Yep. And then also one thing to keep in mind too, because like I had said, and somebody else said it, that can be better for front court guys. And that's true since like center's an actual position. But even that, you want to keep like nuances in mind. Like, for example, you don't want to necessarily look at a team that struggles against centers and then say that they're going to struggle against Karl-Anthony Towns, because nearly every single team guards Karl-Anthony Towns with their 4 instead of their 5. And he just plays differently. So there's still a lot of things that you want to keep in mind if you're doing that.
Yeah, there's another one where Rudy Gobert isn't necessarily a problem to centers. He's a problem to the entire team or penetration. Right. And it's not the sort of same matchup as looking at it in that same way. So that's a good example.
I love when you get like a Joval type center against Gobert at low ownership, because people think Gobert is like going to be swatting his shots at the rim. Meanwhile, Joval's just standing, 18 feet away from the basket.
Rudy Gobert is taking everything from everybody else in those scenarios. Right. He's more likely to sell out on something else and give it up to the alternate big. All right, we got to go to the Houston side of this one. Still no Jalen Green, no Kevin Porter Jr. So this is another one where, man, that ownership is low. $8,200 Christian Wood on FanDuel, projected for 10% ownership. Just go ahead and get more than that right now, I promise. 9,300 on DraftKings. I mean, even at unowned, I have a little bit of interest. I mean, we're talking about a guy that has a big time bump in rates without having Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green on the floor. Armani Brooks is the highest owned guy on DraftKings in this game and on FanDuel. I don't necessarily agree with that. I have a lot more interest. Right. I have a lot more interest in Jayshawn Tate, Eric Gordon, Christian Wood, as I mentioned, than I do going to an already owned Armani Brooks.
If Armani Brooks starts, I'm very interested.
Yeah, 4K. Absolutely.
He started last game against Brooklyn. The reason I say I don't think he starts is that we had seen Tice start 2 games ago, and Silas said it was for matchup purposes. When you were going against a Portis-Giannis front court, I can't really think of a spot I'd be more likely to go with Wood and Tice next to each other. So that's my assumption, is that Tice moves back into the starting lineup. If Brooks does start, I think he's a great value. And obviously that's what our ownership projections are projecting right now. So if he's starting, I think he looks very good. I just don't necessarily think he's going to start.
Same.
Beyond that, I don't see a ton here. 8,300 or 9,300 rather for Christian Wood on DraftKings is fine, but him being center only makes that difficult. Eric Gordon at 5,500 is reasonable. Tate's priced up to where I think it's really difficult to get to him. I don't really see much outside of the Armani Brooks or potentially 3K Daniel Tice if he's starting pieces.
The only reason that I have some interest in Houston is if this game stays close, they're all unowned. And somebody's got to be doing it, whether that's Wood or Tate or Gordon. Like, I want to have some sort of piece of Houston. They're a little bit more appealing on FanDuel, but especially that Christian Wood at 10% ownership at 8,200. He could blow that out of the water if this game stays competitive. So he's a guy that I'm already pretty heavy on. I'm liking that right now. Mr. Mojo said Garrison Matthews is the play. Garrison Matthews is never the play, particularly when he's already 4,700 or 4,400.
Yeah, like Garrison Matthews was the play the first time he started when he was like 10% owned at 3,200 or something. But yeah, tough to get there. And also, just because I didn't touch on it, I'm with you on the Bucks. It's a great spot. Giannis goes without saying, but low ownership on guys like Drew and Middleton against Houston makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah. Anything else here for either side?
Nope.
All righty. Let's talk a little bit about the presenting sponsor of this show. That would be PrizePicks. I'm pulling them up right now. We're going to give Adam a couple PrizePicks, and I'll make sure to, I guess, enunciate a bit clearer here, let you know that it's not Rudy Gay, that it is Rudy Gobert. But we're talking about daily prop-based contests at PrizePicks. You're basically building parlay cards for yourself. You can get a $100 first match deposit bonus if you sign up using the promo code Awesemo. Make sure you're using the link in the description. You also get a free month too of Awesemo Plus Platinum. There's no sharks or optimizers or mass entry. You can make up to a 5-player lineup that can get up to 10x your entry fee. It's not too bad. You make cross-sport entries too if you want to. You can have an NFL/NBA card on a Sunday if you're interested. You can download the app in the App Store, Google Play, or just go to prizepicks.com. And you can use our free player prop tools that are on awesemo.com just to make things a bit easier for you. I'm about to hit Adam with a couple of the props for today. Scrolling down, trying to get to the Milwaukee section, which unfortunately does not exist right now. So let's switch it over to the fantasy score. Maybe they're hiding in this one. Knicks, Pels, Pistons. Nope, we're already through that one. So no sign of the Milwaukee game quite yet on here. James Harden, over under 48 fantasy points for today.
Started to pull up Houston, which would not have been helpful there. You said 48.5 fantasy points?
48 fantasy points.
No, 48. I'll take the over. Not by a lot, but I'll take the over.
Same. I got it at 49.8 right now, so I do have a little bit of interest in it.
Yeah, but you need to subtract a point for the Atlanta strip clubs.
Or add a point, depending on how well it went.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a shot of life. RJ Barrett, over under 24.5 fantasy points.
Over.
I have no problems there. I'm actually going to grab all of the PrizePicks data that's on there right now. I can get that pretty quickly. I want to see what my favorite one is. I want to see if you agree with my favorite PrizePicks play for today. Didn't have it earlier because they add these things more and more as you move on throughout the day. So let's get Kelly Oubre in there and Gary Trent in there. All right, my personal favorite option. Let's see. Why is that not copying? Well, everything that I thought that I was doing didn't work, so I'm going to hit you with one final one. Your boy, Scottie Barnes, 33.5 fantasy points.
Under.
Yeah, I have it actually right now at 36. I'm a little nervous about that. I do have Scottie Barnes in for 36 minutes. Might have his rates a little high. That might just be a full stay away for me. But go to PrizePicks, sign up. Free month of Awesemo Plus. You can see it on the banner, the top of the screen. Free month at Awesemo Plus Platinum if you've never signed up there before, and you get the $100 instant match deposit bonus. It's a pretty good deal. Cleveland Cavaliers at the Minnesota Timberwolves. Cleveland is at full strength. They have nobody on the injury report for right now, other than obviously Colin Sexton. On the Minnesota side, probable tag on Bev, questionable tag on D'Angelo Russell. Not entirely sure what we're going to be doing there. So let's start on Cleveland. We've got Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, and Ricky Rubio on the 10 to 15. Well, I guess I could add Mobley. Mobley, Allen, Garland, Rubio, all in the 10 to 15% owned range. Mobley and Markkanen are in that same range on FanDuel. I actually think that Evan Mobley is the best option from DK at 6,800, but he's actually getting the least amount of ownership of everybody that matters. So talk to me about Cleveland.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Mobley looks good here again, only getting about 10% ownership at 6,800, likely to play a bunch of minutes here. He played 31.6 minutes last game, but I think dealt with a little bit of foul trouble. Maybe he subbed out with a foul, but no, I guess he wasn't in foul trouble, but he didn't get his final run. It was a game that was out of hand. Probably would have subbed back in for a few more minutes. I think it's likely you get, at least 34, 35 minutes, potentially more though, because they could, leave him out there. Like if Cat plays 38 minutes, you could see Mobley match. So I like Mobley at that price tag. He's around the fantasy point per minute guy. Jarrett Allen looks fine at 7,800. Darius Garland at 7,300. His salary's come down a little bit as well. Cleveland, they still don't have anyone that really stands out to me as far as a priority on the slate, but they are kind of quickly going from a team that was overpriced across the board to maybe a little bit underpriced. Rubio at 5,300, actually pulling the most ownership. I think that's very reasonable as well. He's likely to give you 28 to 30 minutes in a competitive game. So I like Cleveland as a team. I don't necessarily think there's one guy that stands out to me the most. I do really like the lack of ownership going to Evan Mobley right now.
Yeah, you and me both on that one. He's 11% on FanDuel, a little bit more expensive, same designation. I'm over that 11% number as well. On the Minnesota side, let's start here. Are you assuming Russell is in or out?
I have him in for right now.
Okay, so do I. If that's the case, the highest owned player in this game is 14% owned Jared Vanderbilt on FanDuel, where he's 5,300. I don't need that much Jared Vanderbilt, although I do think he looks like an okay option given how much he plays. The highest ownership after that, 5.3% owned Karl Anthony Towns. So I'll say it pretty easily here. I'd like to get to 2 to 3% owned Anthony Edwards. I don't really see a ton of legitimate priorities here, but Edwards as a GPP play, unowned, that's the piece that I want the most.
Yeah, I think that one's fine just because Edwards is at a point where he's not, I wouldn't say he's underpriced, but especially if Russell is in, but you still have those games where he just takes over and still gives you a really high ceiling. I would throw Beverly into the conversation as well. He played 22.7 minutes last game, potentially would have played a little bit more if the game had been competitive. We know he was playing 30 plus minutes earlier in the year before his injury and playing well. So him at 4,500 is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I didn't know what to do with his minutes. I went
to like 26 to 28 makes sense.
See, I went 24. I just, not that I think that you're wrong or anything. I mean, I expect him to eventually fall into them. I just don't know when that's going to happen. Russell's status will probably make a little bit of a difference for me there too. I'd probably bump him up to like 26 to 28 if Russell ends up out. Not that I think that matters all that much, but it's just there are now 30 minutes more to go around. So I think it's easier for him to grab them. I just don't know how healthy he is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and he played 13 and a half minutes in the first half last game.
Okay.
And then he subbed in, played 2 minutes and 34 seconds in his final rotation. He played 2 minutes, 34 seconds, went back to the bench. They basically got rid of the rest of their starters a minute or two later. So I don't know. I think 26 is pretty reasonable.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's not going to matter for me at all. He's 5,500 on FanDuel, so I don't really give a shit.
Yeah, more of a DraftKings consideration.
Yeah, for sure. Otherwise, though, this team is pretty difficult to get to.
Agreed.
Again, and like it's not like you're mad that you ever get to Karl Anthony Towns either, or unowned Anthony Edwards. But I think Anthony Edwards with shooting guard small forward designation when you're unowned, just take that shot. You're going to have guys in that area that are pulling up way too much ownership. Muscle Baby says, I hope D Rose goes off tonight. He's not going to be owned, so it'll pay you off.
Someone said can't go wrong with Cat with those bigs. I'm expecting 33 to 35. Kind of a weird take to look at someone being defended by Evan Mobley and think that that's a positive, I think.
Yeah. I mean, or Jared Allen for that matter. It's not like, I mean, as far as like defensive big man rotations go, I don't like to compliment the Cavs all that much, but this one's pretty good.
Yeah. And like, I don't care much about individual player defense, but I am certainly not giving Cat any sort of bump for probably Evan Mobley.
Yeah. That's it's not like last year's Cavs. It's not Dean Wade and Kevin Love trying to slow them down here or something like that. It's a very different team. Pistons, 5.5-point dogs in New Orleans. We got a lot to talk about here. Sort of. So Pistons are at full strength for some reason that I'm not entirely sure of. We saw Josh Jackson get back in the rotation. Cade Cunningham, 12% owned on FanDuel. Think that's reasonable. Saddiq Bey, 18% owned on FanDuel, where he's still 4,800. That's getting old for me. 12% owned Isaiah Stewart, where he's still just a power forward, even though he is the everyday starting center for the Pistons. But who the hell needs to call him a center? How you don't have him as power forward center, but you do on Tristan Thompson and Alex Len? Like, come on, FanDuel. What the hell are we doing here? Jesus. I don't think that Tristan Thompson or Alex Len have ever played a minute of the. No, that's not true. They were playing the stupid two bigs in Washington with Alex Len. Never mind.
Didn't Cleveland do it with Thompson too?
Well, he had Love and Thompson, so Love was technically like the 4 in that alignment. Yep. But either way, Isaiah Stewart is the starting center for the Pistons always, and just power forward eligible on FanDuel. Still looks great at 12% ownership, so I'm happy there. Nobody really pulling a ton of ownership on the DraftKings side, but I think you're happy to get the 30-minute a game guys here.
Yeah, it's a terrible New Orleans team, so this is one of those games where I would need like 12 TVs before I watched it for actual entertainment purposes, but it can be good for, a DFS setting. Stewart at 5,400, I think looks fine. Like you were saying, if he can get the 30 to 32 minutes, there's certainly foul risk here going up against Joval, but decent option. Cunningham at 7,500 can certainly torch New Orleans. Same goes for Jeremy Grant at 7,400, Saddiq Bey at 5,100. Like none of them stand out, but assuming that none of them are going to get a ton of ownership either, which right now we have Saddiq Bey the highest on DraftKings at 10%. They're just guys where you don't necessarily need a ton of them, but they can be very useful where, you have a lineup where 6 of your spots are chalky and then you're just trying to mix in guys that can go for a bunch of fantasy points and are relatively low owned. I think that's where Detroit comes in.
You looking into those 29 minutes from Hamidou Diallo at all? He is 3,400 shooting guard, small forward.
I typically try not to look into much that Detroit does rotation wise because it changes so frequently, but
yes, it does.
So, 5 of them were in overtime. He closed the game basically over Saddiq Bey. So no.
Okay.
It's possible he plays 24 minutes, but it would be different if, I don't know, there's not really even anyone on the team that, because if it was over Jeremy Grant or Cade Cunningham, you're not expecting that to continue either. I just think more often than not, Saddiq Bey is in the closing lineup.
You would think. Okay, so then I guess that begs the question: Frank Jackson?
I was going to say I buy into Frank Jackson's minutes a little bit more. I still I'm not projecting him for 30 minutes or whatever it was either. 25 minutes in regulation, but Jackson is the one we have seen pretty frequently getting actually 22 to 24 minutes. It's not really crazy to think that he can take minutes from Killian Hayes. So I think I would take shots on Frank Jackson before Diallo, I think.
Okay. Then we move to New Orleans. If I could type NOP into my spreadsheet, lots of ownership coming in here. We're going to have a lot to talk about. So We got Brandon Ingram, 21% owned on FanDuel, where he's only 7,700, less ownership coming in, where he's $1,000 more expensive on DraftKings. Josh Hart is 30 to 35% owned across both sites. We're going to have a real conversation about that because that sounds ridiculous to me. Joe Val, 28% owned on FanDuel. I mean, he's 7,500. He got more minutes in this last game out, but overtime too, I believe, but not that it even matters. Like
34 in regulation.
Joe Val is legitimate at 7,500 and at 8K on DraftKings. We're getting Devontae Graham to 15% ownership on DraftKings, where he's only 4,900. Nikhil Alexander-Walker is at 13% ownership at 4,500. That's a kind of interesting thing to me. Not sure who steps in as the backup point guard now. Kira Lewis tore his ACL. I assume it doesn't matter, and it just ends up being like somebody else grabbing 14 minutes. But probably there are a lot of interest. You would think like Trey Murphy can get back into the rotation, and they move people down a little bit. Like they can mix and match these pieces.
It was Sato last game for whatever it's worth.
Okay, I did bump Satoransky's minutes a bit more here, but we got to talk about the ownership on Josh Hart. 30% on FanDuel, 36% owned on DraftKings. Like, I like the price. He's very clearly a good play, and I think he's probably the best valued option from the Pelicans. That ownership seems outlandish.
Yeah, it's one of those where he's clearly one of the best values. I would fully expect him to be in cash lineups at 5K. He played 36 minutes, 37 minutes in regulation last game. He was playing huge minutes before his injury. He's played 13 total games with Brandon Ingram healthy this year, 0.9 DraftKings points per minute for Hart. He looks like a great value. It's also one of those where I think he's likely to go over-owned relative to his chances of success in terms of just being like the best scoring player in his price range in tournaments. And so it's one of those, like, I have no issue. I really have no issue with whatever amount of Josh Hart I get to. I think he's one of the best values. I would be happy to play him here, but at 5K, there's also just going to be low owned guys that I can move to and say, like, yeah, they're going to beat Josh Hart a decent percentage of the time.
Yeah, there's just going to be so many different dudes in that range that are like projected for 20. Like, I got him at 30.5 fantasy points on DraftKings, ignoring whether or not that's correct or not. There's just going to be a lot of guys that are at like 29.5 that are pulling nothing. And that's where it starts to get really interesting. I actually want to look at it quickly since we have a little bit of time here. Just what is in that range on DK. So he is 5K, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, even Devontae Graham in this game on his own team, different position for sure, but he's 15% owned at just point guard. Now, again, like, he's getting a little bit of bump from different positionality, an MPE, but those guys are not all that different than each other, separated by $100. Talen Horton-Tucker, like, ceiling-ish, didn't play the second half of yesterday's game. We'll see where that ends up, but there are a lot of options in this area that aren't pulling the same sort of ownership. So don't get too married to it. But like you made the good distinction. Cash play, yes. Prop, like, best play on New Orleans relative to his salary, yes, I think so too. 36% is a lot on a 9-gamer.
The biggest thing here, I think, is just don't like go into the slate thinking about what you're going to do with Josh Hart, because I think getting bogged down in individual player ownership is like one of the biggest mistakes people still make. If you've built a lineup where, just like trying to quickly think of players we've already talked about that are going to be low owned and have ceilings. Let's say you have Buddy Hield in a lineup. Let's say you have Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton, like one of those low owned Milwaukee pieces. There's no real reason for you not to be including Josh Hart at that point, because he is one of the best point per dollar plays. If you have more popular pieces and then you're rounding out your lineup with a 5K guy, probably take somebody other than Josh Hart in those lineups. So, like, even for me, when at the end of the day, I like right now, I don't know if I'll be over or under the field on Josh Hart, but what really drives that decision isn't, or drives that process, it's not what I think about Josh Hart so much as I'm making a bunch of lineups and then saying, okay, which lineups give me the best combination of, projection and low ownership. And if I can make a bunch of good lineups without Josh Hart, then I end up not getting a lot of Josh Hart. If Josh Hart ends up being necessary in like all of my best lineups, I just play a ton. So I think that's the biggest thing is it certainly stands out as a spot where he's getting a lot of ownership for sure. And you can find pivots, but you also don't want to just like focus too heavily on that one individual spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I'm talking about it, and I'm probably doing a bad job of saying I'm sort of skipping two of the steps in my process that I know where I'm going to end up, generally speaking. I can look at where I have Josh Hart's sim odds in relationship to his ownership and just assume where that's going to come out in the long run. If he continues to be 30% owned on FanDuel, I had him coming out of my sim in like 12% of the time. He's going to be one of the highest negative leverage plays. If he is in some lineups, that's going to be fine. I just think there's going to be a lot at the $5,800 range that I can easily swap off of and like save myself a little bit.
Right.
If Josh Hart beats me, he beats me. But it's not that I have any problem with Josh Hart. If his ownership suddenly dropped to 15%, then I'm going to suddenly have a lot of Josh Hart. I have no preference to Josh Hart in particular. I just care what the public's doing.
Basically, like if Josh Hart, let's say going into lock on DraftKings, Josh Hart is still projected for like 36% ownership. When I look at my exposures after lock, if I have 75% Josh Hart, all that's telling me is that I played a bunch of contrarian guys elsewhere. Yeah. If I have 15% Josh Hart, it tells me that I liked some of the other popular plays on the slate and sacrificed Josh Hart to get them.
That's a really good way to put it. I like that. I like digging into stuff like that too. What you guys should dig into would be the promo code NBA Strategy Show. One gigantic word. You can get Awesemo Plus Platinum Weekly Pass for $29.95. This is everything that we have to access on Awesemo.com. That is player projections, ownership projections, our premium Discord, lineup builder, and a ton more. If you are a new user of Awesemo Plus Platinum, then you can take advantage of this promo code. If you're only interested in playing like NBA DFS, you can get an Awesemo Plus NBA Weekly Pass for $16.95 or our NBA Weekly Express Pass for just $5. That gives you full access to our NBA Showdown and single game contest projections and rankings and all of that good stuff. So stop guessing, start winning, join Awesemo Plus today. 2 games to go. And I don't know if you noticed it on the schedule, but 2 games at 7, 2 games at 7:30, 4 at 8 o'clock, 1 solo game at 10. So you can get to 8 o'clock and sort of just sit back and relax. And Boston Phoenix isn't exactly like the greatest fantasy game in the world. So you can kind of put your shit to bed by 8 o'clock tonight, which is very nice on a Friday.
Yeah, nice Friday night bar night.
There you go. Better than a nice Tuesday night bar night?
Yeah.
Los Angeles Lakers, 5.5-point favorites in Oklahoma City. Saw a nice one out of LeBron James yesterday. He is 6% owned on FanDuel, 12 on DraftKings. We get Anthony Davis as the higher owned guy across both sites, 16 on FanDuel, 13 on DraftKings. He is my preferred option, but at the same time, still a little bit light on the Lakers side of this one. Russell Westbrook pulling basically no ownership across FanDuel and DK. And then Talen Horton-Tucker, about 5% owned on FanDuel and DraftKings. Did not start the second half of yesterday's game. They went to Dwight Howard to start the second half. To take from that what you would like. I don't really know what to take from it. How are you feeling about these Lakers, guys?
You know, I don't follow basketball, like actual basketball, really. Yeah. Is Avery Bradley like doing anything well? Like, is he helping the Lakers in some way that just doesn't show up in DFS? Because I know I view basketball just through DFS mostly.
No, he's not. He's not an asset in really any scenario, and hasn't been for a fairly extended amount of time. He is at dunks and threes in estimated plus minus. He's a minus 3.5 on offense. He's got a 51% true shooting. He can't really make anything from the mid-range, and his defense is highly overrated at this point.
Yeah, it's just I laugh like because they just changed the lineup like every other day, and it's always Avery Bradley is never the one losing his spot. But yeah, I don't really. What they would
really like is if Avery Bradley's name was Kentavious Caldwell Pope.
Yeah, can't have him back. Sorry.
No. I mean, or what? No, sorry, I misspoke. What they really want Avery Bradley's name to be is Alex Caruso.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah. Both of those guys are actual good defenders instead of what people think Avery Bradley is, which is shitty at 31 years old.
But yeah, I mean, as far as this team, it's tough because I don't know. Like, if Dwight Howard starts, he's up to 4,500, so that makes the decision a little bit easier anyway. He would still do well, but even if he starts, he's likely to play, 16 to 20 minutes probably. Don't know if he'll start or not, but Horton-Tucker at 4,900 is somewhat interesting. Even if he doesn't start, there's a good chance he's in the closing lineup and can get you like 26 minutes. If he does start, you're probably getting 30 to 32. So that's a spot to keep an eye on. Also, just keep an eye on the injury report in general, because if all three of Westbrook, James, and Davis are in, then they all lose value. I do still think Anthony Davis at 9,600 on DraftKings looks very good. He's the best per minute guy of the three, and he's also the cheapest. But if LeBron or Davis were to rest against the Thunder, obviously the two remaining guys look a lot better, but not really sure that they'll do that given how just bad the Lakers are and the fact that I'm not sure they can even take the Thunder for granted at this point.
I mean, they are only 5.5-point favorites in Oklahoma City. That is a true embarrassment. Given how
it's one of those where like I'm sure there's some people that are like, this suggests that one of them is sitting. I think it just suggests the Lakers suck.
Yeah, and they do suck. It's no surprises here. I knew this was coming for a while. I said it. I don't think you would disagreed either. So
no, and I hate it because I was talking about it with somebody on Twitter last night. I hate it because one, I'm not a huge fan of LeBron, but I'm also very much the LeBron over MJ corner. So
yeah, same.
I hate when he's on just clearly shitty teams that people can point to and say, oh, he didn't win with them. And then also I became a really big fan of Russ when he was on the Wizards, just like personally. So I hated it when he went to the Lakers because it was like, this is the worst fit imaginable. And people are going to pile on the Russ can't win thing. So like them being bad, just, I hate it.
I just want LeBron to be perpetually good. It's way more fun for me. And, it is whatever. He's incredible. Oklahoma City. Josh Giddey projected for 39% ownership on FanDuel. You can lump him into the Josh Hart bucket. I like Josh Giddey a lot. I probably have Josh Giddey projected for more than most people, just looking at the way that his rates have been. I don't need 39% of him against the Lakers today. To me, that's just an overown. Again, fantastic value piece, probably in the mix for cash games on FanDuel or very highly likely to be in a cash game lineup on a FanDuel slate. I don't want to be there with any sort of volume on the FanDuel side right now from a GPP perspective. SGA, Dort, Giddey, and Baisley, all about 10% owned on DraftKings. For the most part, I think that's where they should be. I don't have too much to add there.
No, neither do I. Team's essentially healthy. Any of SGA, Giddey, Dort look fine. Baisley is terrible at basketball, but 4,100, he's a reasonable value option. None of them stand out as priorities either. And in the least surprising news ever, YouTube chat thinks Michael Jordan is better than LeBron James.
Yeah, it's silly.
I didn't know we had so many 45 plus year olds watching. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, right. And those questions are always a little interesting because, like, from a talent perspective, it's always the current guy, just by default. That's why, like, the 100-meter dash record gets booted every 8 years, or swimming records and shit. Like, we all just get bigger, faster, stronger. It's not up for debate at that point in time. If we're talking about, like, how good were they in relationship to the other people of their era, I'm willing to have that conversation. But
yeah, that one's
from
a
raw
closer.
Talent standpoint, it's always the current.
Right. That's basically my argument. Yeah, if adjusting for era, whatever, but like if you take just prime LeBron and have him play prime Michael Jordan, but like what they were, like LeBron's just better. That's how it works. It's not close.
It doesn't invalidate Jordan, but like
no. And also
2021 is a different ball game here.
Yeah. And one other thing that I know someone pointed out on Twitter before that I agree with, like if you're talking like the whole package, like legacy and influence and all of that, give me MJ also.
Yeah. I agree. All righty. Let's close this one out. Boston Celtics, Phoenix Suns. There's not too much here, but maybe a little bit. Celtics are 5.5-point dogs in Phoenix. No Jaylen Brown. Obviously, no Devin Booker either. Marcus Smart, 20% owned on FanDuel. Feels a little high. Dennis Schroeder, 17% owned on FanDuel. Seems about right. Tatum, Schroeder, Smart, and Horford are all about 10% owned on DraftKings. Do you have any priorities here? I just want to sort of go through those first four guys and not really get too crazy about any one of them.
On Boston?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. One final point. Someone brought up that you can't hand check now. That's one of the dumbest arguments I think people bring up in the MJ versus LeBron thing. Yeah. More physical basketball would benefit the guy who is an absolute physical freak. Like LeBron playing.
Who's hand checking LeBron James?
LeBron playing in a more physical game at his size would just be even better than he already is. But as far as DFS, I'm with you. Tatum, Horford, Schroeder, Smart, they all look fine. It is a fast-paced Phoenix team, but it's also a good Phoenix defense. It's not a particularly appealing spot. I don't see a whole lot here outside of just low-owned guys to counteract ownership elsewhere in my lineup.
Yeah, and then let's close it out. Phoenix Suns, just a little bit of everybody. Bridges, Paul, Ayton, Cam Johnson, Landry Shamet, JaVale, Cameron Payne. All these guys are like 10% owned somewhere, whether it's FanDuel or DraftKings or both. I like all little pieces of this game, but nobody jumps out as like a guy that I have to have. I'm just going to circle through probably 7 or 8 different Phoenix dudes.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. Not a great spot for them either. They prices have adjusted at least a little bit for Booker being out. Paul at 8,300 looks fine. 7,500 for Ayton's a pretty fair salary. We've talked about Bridges a lot. Going to play huge minutes. Doesn't do a whole lot with those minutes, but should certainly be out there. I don't really have priorities here either.
That's, I think, everything. I think we're good here. 9 games up, 9 games down. Deeper dive later today. You got the injury video as well?
Yeah, injury video with Greg, and then deeper dive later.
There it is, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us. Another Friday in the books. Be prepared for news throughout the day. Good luck. Enjoy your weekend. We're back again. Well, I mean, someone will be back again for tomorrow. It will not be me, but good luck this weekend. Have some fun. I'll be back on the strategy show again Monday morning. Enjoy everything.